Hey guys, today's another teamwork build. So, the thing about this build is a lot of people don't realize how powerful terrain manipulation can be. Put enemies in difficult terrain, slow them down, give allies bonuses based on the terrain you're in. Things like that are very powerful. Combine this build with a couple of people that are good at athletics and a cleric, and you can waste enemies' actions all day long if you do it right. Either that or force them to attack allies that are built to take the melee damage, or force them to use their ranged weapons if they have any. Which 9 times out of 10 they either don't have any or they simply are less effective. So, let's get into this build. So we're building around terrain manipulation. So you might think we're going to go Ranger here. But that seems like the class that everybody would pick for this type of build. So no, I think for this build, we're going to be going Stone Order Druid. Druids have more terrain advantages than you might think. And going Druid will give us the primal spell list. So we'll be a lot more versatile than if we just went Ranger. And going Stone Order will give us the Studying Stone feat, which I'll talk about in a second here when I get to level 1, and the Crushing Ground Order spell. This allows us to do some bludgeoning damage. But more importantly, slow down an enemy in our difficult terrain even more, and possibly even immobilize them. For our ancestry and heritage for this build, we're going with the Wetlander Lizardfolk. And we are going with the standard ability score increases. This will give us a 15-foot swim speed, which will allow us to function even in aquatic environments. For background, I've got a rare one for you guys with Astrological Augur. This allows us to cast Augury as a Divine Innate spell once per week. And the spell can see up to an hour in the future rather than 30 minutes. Thus, we might be able to predict what type of terrain is coming up once per week, if we ask the right questions, and we can prepare accordingly. So, our starting stats for this build should be Strength 14, Dexterity 16, Constitution 12, Intelligence 10, Wisdom 16, and Charisma 10. So, for level 1, we do of course get that Studying Stone feat. This gives us auto crit successes on acrobatics checks to balance on uneven ground made of stone or earth, which is about 90% of uneven ground. But more importantly, we also get a +2 circumstance bonus to fortitude and reflex DCs to make us prone or shove us. This also applies to spells that would knock us prone. We really don't want enemies to be able to knock us prone in our own difficult terrain, and this feat will make that harder. We also, of course, do get an ancestry feat at this level, and we're going to take Consult the Stars. Once per day, we can spend 10 minutes to become trained in any one wisdom, charisma, or intelligence-based skill. This does only last until our next daily preparations. However, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm pretty sure that this includes any lore skill. Thus, we can always be trained in the lore skill that is associated with the terrain that we are in, and get a lower DC because of that. Then for level 2, I'm going to start with Order Explorer. And we're going to be picking up the Wave Order for this. You could switch the order of the Wave Order and the Stone Order if you're in a aquatic campaign. I just picked the Stone Order first because it seems like you're going to be on the ground more than you're going to be in water. But you do want both orders here. The Wave Order does give us training in medicine, which is another thing we can do in combat. We also do get the Shore Step feat here, so we can ignore difficult terrain caused by shallow water. We also get auto crit successes on acrobatics checks to balance on wet surfaces and athletics checks to swim. But what we're really after is the Rising Surf focus spell. This allows us to move up to 35 feet and up to 5 feet off the ground. Thus, we can ignore our own difficult terrain and avoid some traps and hazardous terrain. But we don't get this yet unless we start with the Wave Order. and unfortunately we can't take anyone with us when we use this spell. But it's still a good way to move around the battlefield in difficult terrain. And for our first free archetype feat, we'll be taking the Geomancer dedication. So whenever we use a spell slot to cast a spell that has a trait associated with the type of terrain that we are in, we get a terrain attunement effect. Like for instance, casting a fire spell in the desert. I'm not going to go over all these because that would make the video too long. But for a couple of examples, if you're in a forest and you cast a spell with a plant trait, you can make the target clumsy 1 for a round. Or if you're in a mountainous area, you can gain physical resistance, except adamantine, equal to the spell's level for a round. So we gain a little bit of an advantage if we cast the right spell in the right terrain. If the effect targets an enemy, they make a saving throw based on your spell DC, depending on the effects. At level 3, it's time for general feats. And if you've been with this channel for a while, you know the 3 feats I always take for every build on this channel. Toughness, Die Hard, and Canny Acumen, this time for our Fortitude saving throws. We will also want to take Incredible Initiative so that we can get our terrain effects up as quickly as possible. And finally, we'll want to pick up the pace. That will allow us to move through terrains that might not be great for the party rather quickly. Then at level 4, it's Sheltering Cave. This allows us to create a magical structure that is 20 feet in diameter and 10 feet high. We can use this to offer protection from the elements. This gives a standard party a pretty good protection against elements if they need it. So if the party needs to rest in an inhospitable environment, this will help with that. It lasts for 12 hours or until we spend 10 minutes taking it down. Then we'll want to pick up Attunement Shift. If our last action was to cast a spell that applies for our terrain attunement, then we can spend a free action to change our terrain attunement to the trait of the spell we just cast instead of the terrain that we are in. We can do this once every 10 minutes. And that terrain attunement applies to any spell that we cast with that same trait. But after 1 minute, the terrain attunement goes back to the terrain we're actually in. So now we can use any of the terrain attunement effects as long as we cast the right spell. It doesn't matter what terrain we're in. And for our level 5 ancestry feat, we'll want to take Swift Swimmer to increase our swim speed by 10 feet. For the first team report, we're going to need to rely on our spells to do most of what we want to do for this build. But we don't have the feat that lets us give our terrain attunement to allies yet. That means that we're going to need to focus on cold, fire, and plant spells for the moment. Those are the ones that are going to debuff the opponent when we use terrain attunement. We are, of course, also going to need the spells that will slow enemies down. Spells like Web, Mud Pit, and Scatter Screen. So for right now, the terrains that we're mostly going to want to be in for this build are Arctic, Desert, Forest, and Swamp. But we can always switch over to one of those types of spells if we're not in that type of terrain. If we still have spell slots left after we prepare fire, cold, and plant spells, as well as the spells that are going to slow enemies down, then we'll want to focus on spells that will buff our allies. Like, for instance, Protector Tree, which is a plant spell, but won't apply our terrain attunement, because it doesn't affect enemies. Okay, this video is going to be longer than what I'm used to, but I am going to very quickly go over the rest of the feats for this build. First, Advanced Elemental Spell will give us the Stone Lance and Pulverizing Cascade focus spells. This will allow us to slow enemies down and do bludgeoning damage to them respectively. Then Rough Terrain Stance will let us make difficult terrain in an area that we can ignore. Then Eerie Environs will let us intimidate foes without losing our hidden condition. Great way to start off a fight. Then we can finally take Shared Attunement to let us give our terrain attunement benefits to an ally. For our ancestry feat at level 9, we'll take terrain advantage. So non-lizard folk enemies that are within difficult terrain or are in water without a swim speed are flat-footed to us. Next up at level 10 is Eerie Proclamation. So we pick a 10 foot by 10 foot area, and the next creature to enter that area must make a will saving throw. If they fail, they gain a random condition for 2 rounds, or 1 minute if they critically fail. Then for our second dedication, we will want to pick up the Horizon Walker dedication. This will give us the Favored Terrain Ranger feat, as well as a plus 10 bonus to travel speed when in our favorite terrain. If allies follow the expert when in this terrain, they gain both bonuses as well. At level 12, Order Magic will give us whichever focus spell we didn't start with. So that's either Crushing Ground or Rising Surf. Then Wild Strider will allow us to ignore difficult terrain that's non-magical and treat greater difficult terrain as regular difficult terrain, as well as give us an additional benefit from our favorite terrain feats. Then Primal Rampage will give us the Stone Skin and Freedom of Movement spells once per day, and we can cast both at the same time using a 3-action activity. Next up is Terrain Master, which will let us change our favorite terrain by spending 1 hour practicing in the new terrain. This time for Shifting Terrain, which will let us make foes clumsy when we're in rough terrain stance. Then we'll pick up the Ranger dedication, because we're going to need a few Ranger feats for this build. Terrain Shield will give us some physical resistance when we're in Terrain Attunement. For our last ancestry feat, Bone Rider will let us cast Mask of Terror as an innate spell once per day. Then level 18, Gravity Weapon will give us a little bit more damage if we run out of spells. And Warden Step will allow us to help our allies avoid notice in natural terrain. Finally, for level 20, we're going to take Verdant Presence. This will allow us to create difficult terrain and cover as a reaction whenever we would take damage or cast a primal spell. And finally, the last feat for this build is going to be Terrain Transposition. So if all else fails, we can use this spell to move around difficult terrain very easily. Okay, real quickly for the second teamwork reports. Now that we can get buffs to our allies through terrain attunement, we can pretty much be in any terrain we want. We are still going to want to focus on slowing enemies down and getting our terrain attunement effects, and of course, giving those to our allies. We are going to have to be careful about when we use our focus points, though, since we're not taking the feats that will allow us to get our focus points back quicker. If you guys enjoyed this build, then leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more Pathfinder 2e teamwork content. If you're more interested in the lore side of things, then you can check out these videos by my friend Jeff. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.